How's it going, guys? I'm Josh, and today we're going to learn how to make cinemagraphs, aka those wild things you see all over Instagram that look like moving photos. Cinemagraphs are a combination between photography and videography, which makes for something that's completely flabbergasting to look at. Our brains typically look for either a photo or a video, and when it's somewhere in between, it's just really mind-boggling, in the best of ways. I'll be teaching you how to plan, shoot, and edit cinemagraphs. And because this is an introduction to this strange collaboration between two mediums, I'll be helping you kind of conceptualize how to capture motion in the best of ways for this. Now, this tutorial will be meant for beginners. I'll be walking you through every step of the way through Photoshop and shooting. We'll be starting with the most classic, simple cinemagraph, and then we'll be digging into some more advanced ones, like the incorporation of boomerangs, still images, and all that good stuff. And before we jump in, I want to give a huge thanks to Movement Watches for sponsoring this video. I'll be using their watches as examples in this. And if you want to actually learn how to edit this, but you don't have any footage to work with, you can download all the example content that I made my cinemagraphs with for this video right here. And final self-promotional note, if you enjoy my teaching, I have a comprehensive beginner photography course available for sale right here. It's 9 hours of brand new content, and I think you'll love it. Anyway, let's jump into cinemagraphs. Starting off with what you're gonna need. You're gonna need a video camera, so whether it's a DSLR, smartphone, I could care less as long as it does video. You're gonna want a tripod. Having stable video is a crucial component of this process, and you'll need Photoshop, where we're gonna be putting it all together. And if you don't have Photoshop, you can download it right here and start off with a free trial. How do they work? A cinemagraph is two things. So first, it's a layering trick. You take a video of a moving subject, then you take a photo or screen grab of that moving subject and you lay it on top of that video. So now we just have a flat image. Then we cut out a little hole in that image for the area that we still want to see moving. So one area of this cinemagraph is moving while the rest of it is completely frozen. Second, it's a never-ending loop. So the video part of the cinemagraph actually loops into itself so it can be played forever without finding a scene. Now when people realize that, oh, part of this is just a video, they expect for the video to end. But when you realize you can watch this infinitely without ever finding a scene, it becomes that much more transfixing. And that is the magic of the cinemagraph. So for example, I took a video of me flipping through the book, then I took a screen grab of that video, laid it on top, cut out the area where I wanted to see the book moving, did some editing finesse to make it look like it was flipping through constantly on repeat, and voila, we now have a beautiful cinemagraph. What subjects can we cinemagraph? You're going to want to start by looking for subjects that are moving in consistent patterns that you can easily turn into an infinite loop. So for example, some of the most popular starting subjects are water. So look for fountains. Fountains move in the very consistent arches, and you can easily keep that going forever. Same goes for rivers, as well as pouring water. Anything like that is a great move. So I started with just a cup of water that I was swirling around. And to increase the dramatic effect of what you're making, it's helpful to have something in the shot that we freeze that would typically be moving. So for example, having a person in a cinemagraph where the person is frozen and something else is moving looks really awesome because it's jarring not seeing a person move when you'd expect them to be. Meanwhile, if you don't have any moving subjects frozen, you run the risk of it just looking like a video that happens to be looped, and that's not as exciting. For inspiration on subjects, I recommend you follow ScenePix and Flixel on Instagram. ScenePix is an independent creator. Flixel is actually a company that sells the software that makes cinemagraphs for you that's extremely expensive, and you don't even need it because you're going to learn how to make them yourself. And now, how to film. So filming is actually really simple. I usually start off with a stable tripod shooting in 60 frames per second because it's nice to have the option to go in slow-mo, but that is just personal preference. The most important thing here is you need to identify what part of the cinemagraph is going to be kept in motion and make sure that that footage in the video is completely unobstructed by anything moving. So for example, in this one, I knew that the motion would be the moving water, and I'd be selecting all of that. So in the background, you can see my fingers behind the glass. So I needed to keep those fingers extremely still because if I move them at all, it'd make creating a perfect loop so much more complicated. I also recommend always doing a couple different takes of the same video just so you have options, because in one, the table might shake or your hand might move a little bit, whereas in the other, you're perfectly frozen, which is what you need. This is the technique for shooting the most basic cinemagraphs. I'll be giving some more complex techniques later on in the video, but for now, this is a really good start. Also, make sure you go ahead and edit the colors of your video before you open it up in Photoshop because it's easier done beforehand. And last thing before we actually start editing is I want to talk about the technique for doing so. So there are two main techniques for getting the perfect loop for a cinemagraph. First, we have the traditional fade in loop, and this is the most classic traditional way to make a cinemagraph in which the video actually fades into itself, forming a perfect loop. Simpler subjects tend to lend themselves really nicely to this infinite loop, like blowing hair in the wind, smoke, or a flowing river. Second is making a boomerang. So if your subject is ever changing and too complex, like an urban street scene, rather than forming a perfect loop, which is going to be really impossible because you have too many moving parts, you actually turn it into a boomerang in which it goes one way and then it reverses and goes the other way, and just back and forth and back and forth. So the way to do this is you just take the original file you want, you duplicate it, you play it in reverse, and now you have a nice flowing boomerang loop. For my subway one, I started off by trying the infinite loop, but wasn't crazy about how it was looking, so I went with the boomerang effect instead, which I think creates a really nice abstract look. Anyway, let's go ahead and start editing. A fair warning, this might seem complicated at first, but after you've done this process a couple times, it becomes extremely effortless. Step 1, go ahead and get your video all set up. You might want to cut out your favorite segment before putting it into Photoshop, and if so, just make sure you add a few extra segments at the beginning and end, just to give yourself a little extra flexibility. Open up Photoshop, go to File, Open, and go ahead and find that original file. If your timeline thing doesn't pop up like so, just go ahead and go to Window, Timeline, which is good for future reference if you want to close it out later. Now that we're all set up, we're going to go and make the cinemagraph in 2 phases. So phase 1 is looping the background video. Phase 2 is freezing the subject. So if you're working with a boomerang strategy, you can go ahead and skip phase 1 because the video will automatically loop. If you want to do the fade in method, let's start with phase 1. So step number 4, we're going to go ahead and drag the bar of the video to finalize precisely where we want it to start and end. So if it's a river, this won't really matter much because it's pretty consistent. If it's like this water class, we want the first and last frame to look pretty similar, so it'll be a smoother loop. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this in a little bit, and I'm going to start right when I put it down. So right here. I'm going to drag this, just click and drag. And now I want to have it bounce a few times and end on another high note right where it was similar. So right here looks good. And if we want to zoom in, we can use this tool right here. So you'll see, and you navigate by holding this little blue arrow. This is the last frame, this is the first frame. So I'm going to drag this in a little bit so it's more like the first one. There we go. First, last, pretty similar, which will make for a better loop. Step number 5, we're now going to duplicate this video layer by dragging this layer to duplicate. So we're going to grab video group layer 1, just take it to this right here, and now we have it doubled. So it's the exact same layer right on top of each other. You can also duplicate by hitting Command J on a Mac or Control J on a PC. Step number 6, we're now going to take the bottom layer and move it so that it begins right where the top layer ends. And it's helpful to zoom in so you can get that really nice and precise. At this point, this video layer starts right where this video layer ends. So to create the perfect loop, we're going to drag this in just a little bit, and we're going to get rid of all this extra part so they end at the same point. So now step 7, we're going to fade this top video layer out so that it loops into itself. So go ahead and hit the drop down arrow right here and go to the point where the bottom video begins. So let's navigate to right here. This is right where it starts. We're going to hit the opacity button right here. So now what we're going to drag this a little bit further. We're going to hit opacity again. We're going to put it to 0% for opacity. And this makes it completely see-through. We're going to take this right to the very end frame. Opacity is how see-through your image is. And these diamond markers told the video to slowly fade from completely opaque, 100% solid right here, to 0% or completely transparent right here. So this top layer is slowly fading out, while this layer is still 100% solid. Now because this bottom layer is still 100% solid, this creates the effect so that this video fades out into itself, so creating a perfect loop. So let's go ahead and play it back. And to make it play infinitely, make sure you have loop playback checked right here in the settings. So go ahead and hit play and give it a whirl. It's going to be a bit laggy at first, but once it starts going, you'll see we have a really nice loop right here. And you can press pause to stop it. Go ahead and toss a quick save as a PSD in case Photoshop crashes, as it sometimes does with these large video files. And you can do Command Shift Save, or just hit File and then Save As. Before we move on to phase 2, we do want to make sure we have a perfectly looping video. And it's sometimes hard to be sure of this in Photoshop's playback since it can be slow and laggy. So what I often do is I export it, dump it into a video editing software, and duplicate it so I can watch it repeat a bunch of times to get an idea of how the looping will actually look. So step number 8, you can skip this if you're feeling confident, but if you want to double check, go ahead and hit File, Export, and Render Video. Choose a good name since we'll be doing a bunch of refining tests and it gets messy if you don't organize your names. So we'll call this Looping Test 1. High quality is good, all frames, nothing else needs to be changed. Go ahead and render. What we're going to do now, I'm just going to open up iMovie. Really any editing software is fine. So let's toss this in iMovie. Just going to duplicate it a bunch of times and let's give it a watch. Your video is either going to loop beautifully, or you'll think that the fade out was too obvious, too fast, or too slow. So to fix this, try adjusting the length of the fade out. So shortening it is often really helpful since it makes the seam of the loop much quicker. So to do this, we're going to take the left side of this clip and just drag it in a little bit. And we're going to drag this diamond so it goes and aligns perfectly. So then go ahead and repeat step 8, exporting it to see how it looks. And once you have it to your liking, we can move on to phase 2. Now I was pretty happy with the original, so I'm going to hit Command Option Z twice and back to where I was. We've got a good loop now. Phase 2, it's now time to add our frozen element to the shot. Step 9, navigate to the frame that you'd like to use as your still image, and we're going to do a screen grab. So for me, they all look pretty similar, so I'm just going to grab a random one. In step number 10, to get that screen grab, we're going to do Command Option Shift E, and if you're on a PC, it's going to be Control Alt Shift E to create a new layer out of that frame. So that layer, we have it just pop up over here. Now we need it to be its own layer. So I'm going to drag it up in this layers bar. Maybe put it right here and just align it now. Just zoom out a little bit. So it's really long. I'm just going to shorten it so it's the same length. Now we just have this image on top. So if I were to hit play, we would just see nothing. It's just a still image. So we need to cut our hole out to show the area of the video that we'd like to reveal. Now to do this, we're going to move on to step number 11, creating a layer mask. So hit the layer mask button when you have this layer selected, and the layer mask button is right here. Step number 12, make sure that the mask is selected, so just click on it right here. We've got our black layer on top, which is excellent. If it's not, you can go ahead and press D to align black and white, and then just press X so that black is on top. That brings us to step number 13, selecting a brush. So press B to select brush. We're going to go ahead and zoom into the area we're going to be working with, and I just pinch on my keyboard to do so. You can also do Command plus to zoom, Command minus to zoom out. Now we're going to be cutting out the areas of the photo we'd like to show the video beneath. And now we're going to have a nice, decently sized brush, so 50 is fine, and we want it to be pretty soft, so I'll leave it at 30%. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start to paint in the video, and you'll see this kind of moving around a little bit. Now to make this easier to know exactly what you're painting, hit the backslash button on your keyboard, and now the area that you're removing is going to show up as red. So I just want to see the water, so I'm going to be painting the water and the reflection. We have two reflections, so this and this, and you never want to paint more than you need. So get some of this, zoom in for more detail, and I know that the water is going to be sloshing around pretty high, so we want to get more of it. I'm going to make my brush a little smaller as I work around my hand. Now it's really nice to have a perfectly frozen hand, so I'm not going to select my thumb. The thumb will be frozen. If you accidentally paint something you don't want to, what we can do is we can hit the E button and that opens up our eraser. We'll make the brush a little larger and we can go ahead and erase that. And that's the beautiful part of creating these layer masks. They're non-destructive, meaning we can add and subtract very easily if we want to. And if you make a mistake like this, take Command Z and back to normal. I usually just stick with softer brushes and go very small as I work around hard edges like my thumb. So now let's zoom out a little bit and see how it's looking. So I'll hit the backslash again so I don't see the red anymore, and let's play. So now you'll see that my hand is perfectly frozen whereas the water is moving really nicely, and this is looking like a really awesome Cinemagraph. File, Export, Render Video, and we can try 15 frames per second, we can try 20, we can try 30. It'll look differently with all of them, just make sure you title it appropriately. And let's do all of them just so you can get an idea of how they look differently. So this is 10, and then this is 30. You see it's a very, very different look. And congratulations, you now have your first Cinemagraph. Now before we make our final export, I want to give you a couple tips for refining. One of my favorite final touches is cropping it. So you probably shot your video in a 16:9 ratio, which is the classic video ratio. Now I like to crop it to 4:3 or square, which are popular photo ratios, so it seems like more of a moving photo rather than just a still video. If you're making them for Instagram, it's also not a bad idea to make them with your camera shooting video vertically, and then you crop it down to 8:10, so it takes up the most of the screen real estate on Instagram. Now a couple tips for posting them. So if you're gonna be posting these to Instagram, Instagram actually requires the video be at least 6 seconds long, and oftentimes I end up with cinemagraphs that are just 2 or 3 seconds. The simple solution is just dumping this into an editing software and doubling or tripling the file until it's long enough to be posted on Instagram. I also suggest that you mute these before you post them on Instagram. Now the reason why is for the same reason we don't like the 16:9 ratio. Having it silent makes it look more like a moving photo than anything else, and having audio that doesn't actually loop perfectly can ruin the effect. Now, if you can make audio that perfectly loops, that's amazing and not a bad idea. And finally, if you want to be posting these to your website or texting them to people rather than just posting on Instagram, the best method is to be saving them as GIFs and not video. So to save this as a GIF, go ahead and go to File, Export, Save for Web, and that'll save it as a beautiful GIF. And finally, we're gonna wrap this up with a Cinemagraph challenge for you. If you're more advanced with Photoshop and really comfortable using brushes and masking, I'd like to introduce you to more advanced options for Cinemagraphs that I love. For ones like this, our background is the movement, while Quinn, our biker, is the frozen subject. Remember, we need to have the movement be filmed completely isolated. So if Quinn even moves an inch, it'll ruin the entire footage of the background because we no longer have clean without any obstructions. So to solve this problem, I'm gonna have Quinn come in, I'm gonna focus on him, grab a few seconds of video of him, or I can often just take a photo of him since I'm more comfortable editing them. Then, without switching any of the camera settings, I have him leave the shot and I film the same thing without him in it, so I have my clean background with no obstructions. And I'll usually film these backgrounds for a good minute or two just so I have tons of footage to work with and I can choose the best part that seems to loop easily. Now to make this Cinemagraph, I loop the background per usual, then I bring the photo in, I perfectly align it, which just requires stretching it so that it's the same width and center. And then I start from step 9, the beginning of phase 2, where I just need to do some super detailed layer masking, being very precise with the right soft brushes so that it's hard to notice that I've cut him into the shot. And a little tip, the magic wand tool is really helpful for these selection processes. It really speeds up the work. And just so you know, I did speed up this entire thing. It can take 5 or 10 minutes when I'm doing this really precisely. I personally like superimposing a photo rather than doing a screen grab because I'm just more comfortable editing photos. But if you're gonna edit the photo independently, make sure you edit it very consistently with the video, because if you have a photo that's super saturated and warm and the video is super cold and gray, it's gonna look kind of awkward. So make sure everything's still kept very consistent. And that's Cinemagraphs. Now I know it may have seemed like a lot, but after you've shot a few of these for yourself, your brain will begin functioning in the form of Cinemagraphs. You'll just easily identify opportunities to make them, and editing them will never take more than 10 or 15 minutes, even with some complex layer masking. And if you're having any trouble conceptualizing how to make them, don't worry, I had the exact same problem when I first started. Just really gotta practice and they'll start to make way more sense over time. Anyway, final step of this process, if you make any awesome Cinemagraphs, post them on Instagram with the hashtag JoshKatzPhotos and tag me Josh Katz so I can see your work and make me super happy to know you guys are progressing thanks to this video. Thanks again to Movement Watches for sponsoring this video. And if you guys want to check out my beginner photography course because you think you like my teaching now, you can do so right here. It's 9 hours of amazing content, including Lightroom, marketing your shots, shooting, all that great stuff. Anyway guys, subscribe for more videos. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you eventually.